Harlan Twist, who had the joyless smile of someone who just found a credit chit under a pile of trash, surveyed the chaos through the cracked glass of his office window. Portalis, the city that claimed to be the nexus of interstellar cooperation, was showing all the cooperation of a sack of angry cats. The central teleportation hub, that marvelous piece of technology that was supposed to be mankind's crown jewel, had just had a minor hiccup. Minor in the same way a supernova is a small light show. Harlan, the control panels having a fit again, piped up Gertie, his assistant, who had the demeanor of a drill sergeant and the voice of a banshee with a chainsaw fetish. Her hair, an aggressive shade of blue, stood up in spikes that looked ready to stab anyone who got too close. "Isn't that nice?" Harlan replied, his tone dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could rust metal. And here I was, worried I'd have a boring day at the office. Can't have that, can we? Outside, the streets were filled with the kind of pandemonium that only an unexpected alien visitation could provide. Shimmering ships, all bizarre angles and improbable physics, loomed over the city. They looked like they'd been designed by a committee of toddlers with access to advanced quantum calculators. Harlan turned away from the window and focused on the terminal, which was blinking redder than a guilty politician. The screen cheerfully announced, "Teleportation anomaly detected. Please contact technical support." "Oh, I'll just ring them up, shall I?" Harlan muttered. "Hello, technical support. Yes, we've got a wee problem with some uninvited cosmic guests. Any chance of a fix before lunch?" Gertie snorted, a sound that suggested she'd been smoking sandpaper. "You know, for a supposedly cutting-edge city, we've got all the technological reliability of a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Well, at least our disasters are never dull," Harlan responded, ever the optimist. After all, why go for dull when you can have catastrophic? The office door banged open, admitting a blast of noise and a man who looked like he might be more comfortable in a wrestling ring than in the corridors of government. This was Rook, head of security, who had the build of a reinforced bunker and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Twist," Rook barked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "We've got a problem. Just one. I should be so lucky," Harlan replied, leaning back in his chair. "Let me guess, the aliens didn't come for the local cuisine." Rook grunted, which for him was practically a soliloquy. "They've set up camp in the main plaza, got themselves all cozy. Looking to negotiate, they say." "Negotiate with us." Harlan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "What the hell could they possibly want from us? A guidebook on how not to design a city?" Gertie shook her head, her eyes gleaming with a kind of manic glee. "Well, if they're here for cultural exchange, they're in for a treat. We've got enough culture to last them a lifetime, just like we've got enough bureaucracy to last them a century." Harlan drummed his fingers on the desk, considering their options. "All right, let's go have a chat with our new friends. Maybe they've just popped by for a cup of sugar." The three of them made their way through the building, each step accompanied by the symphony of chaos outside. As they reached the street, Harlan noticed the city had taken on the atmosphere of a carnival, designed by someone with a deep hatred for fun. The plaza was a swirling mess of confused humans and curious aliens, the latter looking as out of place as a clown at a funeral. Their ships, parked haphazardly around the square, hummed ominously, like they were planning to redecorate the city whether the locals liked it or not. "Well, here we are," Harlan said, spreading his arms wide. "Let's go introduce ourselves." A figure emerged from the throng of aliens, tall and regal with skin that shimmered like oil on water. The alien, presumably in charge, had a look that managed to convey disdain and amusement simultaneously. Quite the talent. "Greetings," the alien said, its voice smooth and unearthly. "I am Xylox of the Zarnak Dominion. We mean you no harm." "That's reassuring," Harlan replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "But forgive me if I don't invite you over for tea just yet." Xylox inclined its head, the motion fluid and nearly serpentine. "Understandable. We are here due to an unfortunate error in your teleportation systems. It seems your technology has brought us here prematurely." "Prematurely?" Harlan echoed, raising an eyebrow. "And what was the plan, if you don't mind me asking?" "Dropped by when we were too busy to notice." Xylox's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile or a grimace. "Our intentions were to initiate contact on more official terms, but your system is rather antiquated." "Antiquated," Gertie muttered, crossing her arms. "That's one way to put it. Another would be held together by spite and duct tape." Harlan focused on Xylox, trying to gauge the alien's true intentions. "So, what now? You planning to hang around until our tech sorts itself out, or do you have other plans?" "Our presence was not meant to be disruptive," Xylox said, its tone almost apologetic. "However, we cannot leave until the anomaly is resolved. Until then, we are willing to discuss terms of coexistence." "Terms of coexistence," Rook grumbled, shifting his weight. "Sounds a lot like stick around and see how much we can squeeze out of you." Harlan sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of a man who'd just been given a new set of problems to wrangle. "All right, Xylox, let's say we sit down and talk, but understand this, my people aren't going to be thrilled about the sudden house guests." Xylox nodded. Its demeanor calm. "We understand, Mr. Twist. We only desire peace and mutual benefit." "Peace and mutual benefit," Harlan repeated, as if tasting the words. Well, let's see if we can't find a way to make this unexpected visit as painless as possible. As they turned back toward the government building, Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Between the unpredictable aliens and the ever-fickle teleportation hub, Portalis was shaping up to be a real hotbed of cosmic diplomacy, or a comedy of errors. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a ride. You know, Gertie said as they walked, I never thought I'd miss the days when our biggest problem was deciding what to do about potholes. Potholes, Harlan chuckled, shaking his head. Let's hope we don't end up with craters before this is over. The walk back to the building was about as pleasant as a root canal in zero gravity. Harlan shuffled his feet, kicking at random bits of detritus that had no doubt been teleported in from some god-forsaken corner of the galaxy. The kind of rubbish that made you wish for more straightforward apocalypse, like a good old-fashioned plague. So, Gertie, Harlan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, you feelin' optimistic about our new roommates? Oh, sure, Gertie replied, her eyes rolling like planets around a sun. Nothing makes me happier than sharing living space with cosmic squatters. Maybe they'll even give us tips on universal domination. Rook followed silently, his expression that of a man who'd been force-fed a diet of nails and vinegar. It was his default setting, really perpetually annoyed, like a bear with a toothache in a world full of noisy tourists. As they entered the building, the usual cacophony of malfunctioning machinery greeted them, like an orchestra composed entirely of tone-deaf drummers. The central teleportation hub was the kind of place where technology went to die a slow, painful death, and today it was in rare form. Looks like the hub's having a bad day, Gertie observed as they approached the control room, where screens flickered with the indecisiveness of a neurotic squirrel. More like the system's drunk on power and making poor life choices, Harlan quipped, jabbing at the terminal with the resignation of a man who knew he'd get nothing useful out of it. Suddenly, a new message popped up on the main display, as if the system had decided to throw a surprise party in honor of inevitable doom. Xylox Protocol initiated. Enter authorization code. Xylox Protocol, Harlan said, raising an eyebrow. Is that where we all hold hands and sing about galactic peace while they set up colonies in our backyards? Something tells me it's less cumbaya and more bend over, Gertie replied, her voice laced with both sarcasm and a touch of dread. Rook grunted his agreement, folding his arms like a bouncer at an intergalactic dive bar. We need to find out what this protocol really means. Could be they're planning to settle in for the long haul. Harlan nodded, his mind whirring like an overworked cog in a machine of bad decisions. Right. Let's see if we can dig up anything useful in this pile of interstellar junk. The trio set to work, fingers flying over keys and eyes, scanning lines of code with the desperation of people trying to defuse a bomb they didn't understand. It was less a matter of skill and more an exercise in futility, like trying to fill a black hole with optimism. Got something, Gertie said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like a buzzsaw. Looks like our pals from the Zarnak Dominion aren't just here for a chat. They're using the hub to establish permanent settlement links. Harlan cursed under his breath. So, we're not just hosts for a casual visit, we're the welcome mat for a full-blown alien colonization. Pretty much, Gertie confirmed, her expression grim. They've got plans to turn Portalis into their new home base, and we're the ones stuck figuring out the logistics. Rook let out a low growl, the sound reverberating with the promise of violence. We can't let this happen. We've got to shut it down before they dig in. Agreed, Harlan said, his voice carrying a steely edge. But we can't just pull the plug without knowing what else it might trigger. We need leverage. Leverage, Gertie echoed, skepticism coloring her tone. What are you thinking? Hostage diplomacy. More like playing their game, Harlan replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. If they want to use our tech against us, maybe we can return the favor. His plan was simple, in the way that diving headfirst into a black hole is simple, get the aliens' own technology to work against them. But first, they'd need to find a way to communicate with the hub systems without setting off a cosmic fireworks display. If we're going to sabotage their plans, Harlan continued, we need to find their point of vulnerability. Something that can disrupt their operations without blowing us all to kingdom come. Sounds like fun, Gertie said dryly. I'll start by seeing if I can access more of their protocols from here. Maybe they left the back door open. Do that, Harlan said, turning to Rook. Meanwhile, we better monitor what's going on out there. We can't let them know we're onto them. Rook nodded, his expression grim. I'll keep an eye on the plaza. If they make a move, I'll know. With their task set, the group dispersed, each to their respective roles in this unwelcome game of interstellar chess. Harlan stayed behind at the control panel, his mind racing with possibilities and questions, mostly how the hell did we get here, and how much worse can this get? The answer, as it turned out, was a lot worse. Several hours later, Gertie returned, her face a mix of triumph and frustration. Good news and bad news, boss. Great, Harlan said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. Start with the good news. I could use a pick-me-up. Gertie smirked, tapping a small data pad in her hand. Managed to crack into their communications network. We've got access to their internal messages. And the bad news? Harlan asked, bracing for impact. Apparently their idea of coexistence includes a bureaucratic nightmare. They're already setting up their own administration, right on top of ours. It's like throwing a live grenade into a department of paperwork and seeing what explodes first. Perfect, Harlan muttered, rubbing his temples. So not only are they planning to stay, but they're also reinventing the wheel of misery. Pretty much, Gertie confirmed. They've got their own version of forms, regulations, and what looks like a whole lot of red tape. It's a bureaucratic brawl. Just what we needed, Harlan sighed. Aliens who think they can out-administer us. At that moment, Rook entered the room, his face a storm cloud of irritation. We've got a bigger problem. Xylox just declared the plaza a Zarnak heritage site. Harlan blinked. A what? Means they're claiming it as their territory, Rook explained, disdain dripping from his words. And the locals aren't happy. It's getting ugly out there. Ugly, Harlan repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. Well, I suppose it was only a matter of time before things went from bad to worse. So, what's the plan? Gertie asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Harlan thought for a moment, weighing the thin line between diplomacy and disaster. We need to divide and conquer. Create enough chaos in their system that they'll have to negotiate on our terms. And how do you propose we do that? Rook asked, arms crossed over his chest like a living barrier. Harlan grinned, the kind of grin that suggested he was either brilliantly insane or just plain screwed. We play both sides, feed them enough misinformation to keep them off balance while we figure out how to shut down their operations. You're talking about espionage, Gertie said, a wicked gleam in her eyes. I like it. It's about time we turn the tables. Exactly, Harlan agreed. And if we're lucky, we might just survive this with a city that's still in one piece. With a plan as thin as a thread of spider silk in place, they set about their tasks. Gertie dove into the alien network, manipulating data with the finesse of a master thief. Rook took to the field, coordinating with local forces to maintain some semblance of order and prevent a full-scale riot. As for Harlan, he focused on the larger picture, piecing together the fragments of a future that didn't involve being conquered by interstellar squatters. It was a long shot, like trying to win a lottery you didn't buy a ticket for. But it was better than surrendering without a fight. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last, until finally the console lit up with a message that made Harlan's heart skip. System override detected. Code, Xylox deactivation. Gertie, you genius, he whispered, unable to suppress a grin. You actually did it. Hell yeah, Gertie replied, her voice crackling through the comms with the satisfaction of a job well done. I've set their protocols into a loop. They'll be chasing their tails for a while. Nice work, Harlan said, feeling a surge of hope. Now we need to get Xylox to the negotiating table before they catch on. On it, Rook's voice came through, gruff but determined. I'll make sure they know we're open for talks. Let's see if they're smart enough to play ball. As the pieces fell into place, Harlan couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, trading punches with an alien empire, all because of a malfunctioning teleportation hub and some cosmic misunderstanding. But then again, he mused, wasn't that the human experience in a nutshell? Facing the universe's madness with a smirk, a middle finger, and a plan that just might work. Because what else was there to do but laugh in the face of the inevitable? With the city still standing and their sanity more or less intact, Harlan felt a glimmer of victory on the horizon. It was small, like a candle in a hurricane, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. Harlan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen like it had just insulted his lineage. The data Rook had pulled from the Zarnak communications was as dense as neutron star matter and twice as confusing. He wondered if alien legalese was a universal constant, like the speed of light or the idiocy of bureaucrats. So let me get this straight, Harlan started, rubbing his temples. They've declared our public square a Zarnak heritage site, they're establishing their own version of the DMV, and now they want to negotiate. Sounds about right, Gertie replied, her voice like a knife made of sarcasm. Only they're not negotiating. They're establishing preliminary diplomatic relations, which I think is bureaucrat speak for we're here to stay and you're gonna like it. Great. Harlan muttered, just what we needed. Aliens with a penchant for paperwork. Hey, at least they're not shooting us, Gertie offered with a shrug. Yet, Rook agreed, his voice a low growl as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Doesn't mean they won't if we piss them off. Which brings us to our next task, Harlan said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice and failing spectacularly. We need to find a way to communicate with these overgrown space bureaucrats without triggering their interstellar red tape. How do you propose we do that? Gertie asked, a skeptical eyebrow raised. We need someone who can talk their talk, Harlan replied, thinking aloud. Someone who can wade through their regulations and come out the other side with something resembling a deal. Sounds like you're volunteering, Rook said, a rare hint of amusement in his voice. I'm not exactly what you'd call a diplomat, Harlan retorted, unless diplomacy involves a lot more sarcasm and a lot less patience than I'm aware of. Still, you're the closest thing we've got, Gertie pointed out, unless you think Rook here's gonna charm them with his sunny disposition. Rook snorted, a sound that could have stripped paint off a hull. I'm more the strong, silent type. Strong definitely, Gertie conceded. Silent, not when he's pissed. Harlan sighed, glancing at the clock. Each tick felt like a countdown to disaster. All right, I'll take a crack at it, but I'll need backup. Someone who can handle their tech side while I'm trying not to strangle them with their own regulations. I'll go, Gertie volunteered, tapping away at her datapad. I've already got a handle on their protocols. Might as well use it. Great, Harlan said, standing up and stretching. Let's go see if we can teach these aliens a thing or two about human stubbornness. The corridors of Portalis were a mess of blinking lights and hissing steam as the hub continued its merry descent into malfunction. It was almost as if the building itself was in on the joke, laughing at Harlan's expense. He trudged towards the central gathering area, where the Zarnak representatives had set up shop, each step feeling like he was marching towards an impromptu performance review, one that could end with him being vaporized. Zarnax had claimed a large conference room, its entrance flanked by guards who looked like someone had given a crash course in intimidation to a pair of disgruntled walruses. Inside, the room was a clash of human and alien aesthetics, harsh metallic angles meeting soft luminescence that made Harlan feel like he was stuck inside a very opinionated art exhibit. At the head of the table sat the Zarnak delegate, a creature with enough frills and feathers to pass for a particularly eccentric peacock, if peacocks had a penchant for wearing ceremonial armor. It regarded Harlan and Gertie with an expression that suggested it had smelled something particularly unpleasant and was trying to be polite about it. Greetings, representatives of the human enclave, the delegate intoned, each word carefully measured as if it was afraid of breaking something. I am Zardoc, appointed liaison to the Zarnak Dominion's expansion into your area. Expansion, Harlan echoed, doing his best not to sound like a man who'd just been told his house was being foreclosed. Right, well, I'm Harlan Twist, and this is Gertie. We're here to discuss this expansion of yours. Indeed. Zardoc said, its frills fluttering slightly. The Zarnak Dominion seeks to mutually benefit from your planet's strategic location. As per the Xylox protocol, we are entitled to establish a presence. And by presence, you mean taking over our plaza and setting up shop? Gertie asked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the posturing. The protocol is clear, Zardoc replied, with the patience of a saint or someone who practiced patience in front of a mirror. We are to establish cultural and administrative centers to ensure the preservation of our mutual interests. Mutual interests. Harlan repeated, nodding like he was agreeing to something deep and philosophical. And what if our interests don't quite line up with yours? Then we must engage in further dialogue, Zardoc said, its voice as smooth as a politician's promise. It is imperative we respect the tenets of coexistence. Coexistence, Gertie echoed, a sardonic smile on her lips, like colonization but with more politeness. Harlan sighed, leaning forward. Look, Zardoc, we get it. You're here to stay, but so are we. We don't mind sharing, but this whole Zarnak heritage site thing isn't exactly making friends. It is a necessary designation, Zardoc insisted, to ensure the protection of our cultural activities. And what about our cultural activities? Harlan asked, gesturing around. Our plaza isn't just a strip mall for you to convert. Zardoc's eyes glimmered with something, understanding perhaps, or just the flicker of an idea that hadn't yet fully formed. Perhaps there is room for negotiation. We could consider a joint administration agreement. Gertie shot Harlan a look. Joint administration. Sounds like they want us to do their paperwork. And you love paperwork, Harlan replied dryly, trying to keep the conversation from spiraling into the abyss of interstellar red tape. Indeed, Zardoc continued, oblivious to, or perhaps ignoring, the sarcasm. A joint effort could enhance our cooperation, ensuring both parties benefit. And what do we get out of it, aside from headaches and an influx of alien tourists? Harlan asked, folding his arms. Access to Zarnak technology, Zardoc offered, its tone smooth and tempting, a sharing of resources and perhaps even cultural exchanges that could enrich both our peoples. Gertie perked up at this. Access to Zarnak technology, you say? Indeed, Zardoc confirmed, its frills twitching with what might have been enthusiasm. Our systems are highly advanced. Your people could learn much. Well, it's better than a kick in the teeth, Harlan murmured, considering the offer. All right, Zardoc, let's see what we can work out. But no more surprise heritage designations without a heads up yet. Agreed, Zardoc said, inclining its head slightly. Let us proceed to formalize this understanding. As Harlan and Gertie left the meeting, their minds buzzing with the complexity of what lay ahead, Rook met them at the entrance, arms still crossed and scowl firmly in place. So how'd it go? Rook asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and impending doom. About as well as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, Harlan replied, rubbing his eyes, but we might have made some progress. Zardoc is open to a joint administration agreement. And what's that mean exactly? Rook asked, narrowing his eyes. It means we might have a shot at working with them instead of being steamrolled, Gertie explained. Access to their tech, cultural exchanges, the works. Or it means we're signing our rights away under a different name. Rook countered, watch your backs. These aliens play the long game. Don't worry, Rook, Harlan said, patting his friend on the shoulder. we'll keep our eyes peeled. But for now, it's a step forward. One small step, Gertie quipped, and hopefully not off a cliff. They returned to the control room, where the hub continued its mechanical opera of malfunctions and mishaps. Despite the progress, or perhaps because of it, the hub had decided it was time to introduce a new element to the chaos, a fresh wave of unauthorized alien visitors. As the console lit up with warnings and alerts, Harlan let out a groan. Well, that didn't take long. More visitors, Gertie asked, glancing at the screen. Looks like it, Harlan confirmed, watching the data scroll past. Unauthorized teleportations. We've got company. Damn it, Rook muttered, cracking his knuckles. Guess diplomacy just got postponed. Harlan chuckled, a sound that was more resignation than amusement. Welcome to Portalis, where every surprise is a bad one. On the bright side, Gertie added, at least we're consistent in our chaos. True, Harlan agreed, readying himself for the next round. Let's see just how welcoming we can be to our unexpected guests. With the hub still malfunctioning and the alien delegation busily setting up shop, the trio braced for the next wave of interstellar madness. Because, after all, in the grand, grim circus of life on Portalis, the show must go on. The chaos had an uncanny ability to amplify itself. The central teleportation hub, a monument to the folly of relying on alien tech, continued its schizophrenic opera of blips and inexplicable flashes. Portalis was alive with the hum of malfunctioning equipment and the occasional mumbled curses of those unfortunate enough to cross paths with it. Harlan Twist stood in the control room, the screen flickering with data that was as much gibberish to him as a toddler's finger painting was to a museum curator. His eyes were glued to the mess of unauthorized entries. Well, Gertie, looks like the intergalactic welcome mat's been set on fire. What's our esteemed protocol-savvy friend Zardock up to now? Gertie, who was juggling a cup of something with the caffeine content of a small supernova and her ever-accumulating list of grievances, peered over his shoulder. I'd wager a month's pay they're enforcing their new rules like a particularly militant traffic warden. Rules, Harlan muttered, the word leaving a sour taste. Funny how they always seem to favor the rule makers. As if on cue, Rook stopped. His scowl now a permanent fixture. They're clamping down on the square. Bunch of Zarnak bureaucrats waving their clipboards like some kind of lethal weapon. If annoying was a superpower, they'd be the Justice League. Fantastic, Harlan sighed, rubbing his temples. What's next? Telling us how to tie our shoelaces. The way they're going, that might not be far off, Rook replied. They're pushing these regulations like a drug dealer at a rehab clinic. Gertie snorted into her cup. And here I was thinking today couldn't get any better. If we're not careful, it'll get a whole lot worse, Harlan said, eyes narrowing at a particularly ominous line of code that scrolled across the screen. We need to find a way to get a leg up before we all drown in red tape. More like a sea of red tentacles, knowing these guys, Rook added, folding his arms. So what's the plan? First, we find out what these bureaucrats have missed, Harlan said, a glimmer of something almost like hope flickering in his eyes. If they're as thorough as they're annoying, there's bound to be a loophole somewhere. Gertie raised an eyebrow. A loophole, in their procedural fortress, sounds like a needle in a haystack sort of deal. More like a needle in a galaxy, Harlan admitted. But what choice do we have? If we play by their rules, we're screwed. If we don't find a way around them, we're double screwed. I'd prefer to stick with the single serving of catastrophe, thank you. The three of them huddled around the console, like conspirators planning a particularly underhanded heist, fingers flying over buttons and screens, as they delved into the digital innards of Zarnak bureaucracy. Somewhere down the corridor, a distant bang suggested yet another piece of the hub was valiantly sacrificing itself for the cause of unexpected explosions. After what felt like hours, Gertie's fingers paused and she leaned back, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Gotcha, you slippery bastard. Found something, Rook asked, leaning in with the enthusiasm of a dog spotting a squirrel. A clause, Gertie confirmed, tapping the screen with relish. It says here that any interference with established cultural practices is prohibited. If we can argue that their occupation disrupts our cultural activities, we might just have a way to push back. Brilliant, Gertie, Harlan said, the corners of his mouth lifting in a lopsided smile. Looks like we've got ourselves a fighting chance. Rook, however, remained skeptical. And how exactly do we convince them that our cultural activities involve not having our plaza turned into a circus? Leave that to me, Harlan said, eyes gleaming with the kind of manic determination that only came from equal parts caffeine and desperation. We put on a show so undeniably human they can't refute it. What, like a bake sale? Rook quipped. More like a protest, Harlan countered. We gather everyone we can, make it a cultural spectacle they can't ignore, and if that fails, maybe throw in some pie for good measure. With their plan, as half-baked as it was, set in motion, the trio spread the word through Portalis. The response was a mixed bag. People were wary of the Zarnak presence, but they were also tired of being stepped on. It was amazing what a little shared resentment could do for community spirit. As the day of their cultural event approached, the square became a beehive of activity, the kind usually reserved for last-minute exam cramming or politicians before a debate. Banners were hung, makeshift stages erected, and a smorgasbord of distinctly human entertainment prepared. The Zarnak delegation watched with thinly veiled suspicion, their frilled emissary Zardoc observing from across the plaza, flanked by guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When the day arrived, Harlan took his place at the center of the square, feeling more like a ringmaster than a negotiator. Around him, humans milled and mingled, musicians tuned their instruments, and a couple of artists painted protest banners with slogans that ranged from Portalis for people to Zarnak's Go Home, though the latter was quickly retracted after an incident with a paint spill. Gertie sidled up to Harlan, nudging him with her elbow, ready to give these aliens a taste of human culture. Harlan grinned. "My only regret is not having popcorn." Rook, ever the bearer of bad tidings, gestured towards Zardoc and his entourage. "They're watching us like hawks, frilled, slightly annoyed hawks." "Good," Harlan said, straightening up. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." As the protest began, music filled the air, a cacophonous mixture of genres that somehow worked. People sang, danced, and generally made a spectacle of themselves, all under the watchful eyes of the Zarnak. For once, the square was alive with the kind of energy that couldn't be replicated by alien protocols or regulations. Harlan took a deep breath and stepped forward, clearing his throat into a makeshift microphone. "Welcome everyone to our first annual, let's call it Cultural Awareness Day. Now, I know our friends the Zarnak are here to learn about us, so let's show them what it means to be human." The crowd cheered, a sound that echoed off the buildings with the enthusiasm of a crowd that had been pushed to its limit. Zardoc stood impassively, though Harlan could almost swear the alien's frills were twitching with something that might have been irritation. "Let's start with some music," Harlan continued, gesturing to a band that launched into a lively tune that was equal parts folk and rock, the kind of music that defied categorization and thrived on chaos. As the musicians played, people danced, their movements as much an act of defiance as they were of joy. The square was a vibrant mess of sound and color, a living, breathing rebuttal to the sterile order the Zarnak sought to impose. Zardoc, for his part, watched the proceedings with a mixture of disdain and what might have been grudging respect. The alien stepped forward, its voice rising above the din. "This display, while informative, does not change the terms of our agreement." Harlan stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Just showing you what you'd be missing out on if you turned this place into a bureaucratic wasteland. Besides, we found some fine print in your protocols, something about cultural non-interference." Zardoc's frills quivered, whether in annoyance or intrigue was anyone's guess. The clause in question was meant to protect established traditions, not spontaneous gatherings. Rook, taking his cue, stepped up next to Harlan. "Oh, this is established all right. We've been doing this for years. Hell, some might say cultural improvisation is our tradition." "Exactly," Gertie chimed in, not missing a beat. "It's all about the spirit of the thing, and I promise you, we've got spirit in spades." The Zarnak delegate remained silent for a moment, as if weighing the absurdity of the situation against the rigidity of its regulations. "Very well," Zardoc said eventually, though the words seemed heavy with reluctance. "We shall reconsider our approach to this location, provided you maintain adherence to mutual agreements." "Deal," Harlan said, extending his hand in the universal gesture of agreement, though he doubted the Zarnak would reciprocate. Sure enough, Zardoc merely inclined its head, an acknowledgement more than a handshake. "We shall continue our observation and dialogue." With that, the alien withdrew, its entourage following in silent retreat. The humans remained, buoyed by a sense of tentative victory, if not outright triumph. As the square slowly emptied, the festivities winding down, Harlan felt the weight of the day lift, if only slightly. "Well, that was something. Something indeed," Gertie agreed, looking around at the remnants of the protest. "Think they bought it. They didn't exactly storm the barricades," Rook pointed out. "So I'd say we've won this round." "Let's hope there aren't too many more rounds to go," Harlan said, though he knew better than to think this was over. In the grim, dark theater of interstellar diplomacy, every act was just a prelude to the next. Gertie shrugged, her expression somewhere between exhaustion and satisfaction. "Well, we've got our foot in the door. Now it's just a matter of keeping it there without getting crushed." Harlan nodded, already anticipating the challenges to come. "We'll do what we always do, adapt, improvise, and hope for the best. And keep an eye on those bureaucrats," Rook added. "They're not done yet, not by a long shot." Harlan chuckled, a sound that was more resolve than amusement. "Neither are we," as they left the square. The distant rumble of the malfunctioning hub echoing like a promise of more chaos to come, they knew the road ahead was anything but smooth. But for now, they'd taken a step forward, and in the unforgiving world of Portalis, that was enough. Tomorrow they'd face whatever came next, ready to outwit, outlast, and with any luck, outmaneuver the aliens who dared to underestimate the stubborn resourcefulness of humanity. The square was finally empty, quieter than a Zarnak negotiation table after the humans had reluctantly shuffled home. The protest had been a temporary reprieve, a bandage on a bullet wound. Harlan stood there, surveying the aftermath like a general inspecting a battlefield, or more accurately, a janitor eyeing a mess he'd have to clean up. We sure threw one hell of a party, didn't we? Gertie said, coming up beside him with a sigh that spoke more of fatigue than celebration. Yeah, and I can't wait for the hangover, Harlan replied, running a hand through his hair. Think we made an impression? Depends. If you mean on the Zarnak, probably. If you mean on the universe, not so much. Rook appeared, looking like he'd spent the night wrestling an oil leak. Heard Zardock might have called in reinforcements. The frilled bastards weren't too thrilled with our cultural display. Harlan's expression darkened, though he tried to pass it off with a chuckle. Guess they're music critics now. The trio began to walk back to their makeshift HQ, or what passed for it in Portalis. The corridors were as welcoming as a junkyard on a rainy day. Machines hummed and sputtered, each one a reminder that alien technology was about as reliable as a solar-powered flashlight in a black hole. Speaking of reinforcements, Gertie said, attempting to lighten the mood, how long before we see another delightful visitation from our frilly friends? Not long, I'd guess, Rook answered grimly. Word is they've got more rules to shove down our throats, something about enhanced monitoring protocols. Great, Harlan muttered. More eyes watching us while we fall apart, just what we need. As they entered the control room, the air was thick with tension, layered over the usual smog of malfunctioning equipment. Zardock's reconsideration hadn't amounted to much more than a temporary pause before the next crackdown. The Zarnak were nothing if not persistently irritating. Like a rash that wouldn't quit, they'd return with more bureaucracy to strangle what little freedom was left. Gertie slumped into a chair, staring at the console with the kind of hopeless optimism only caffeine could inspire. So what's the plan now? Keep banging our heads against the wall until it falls down. Sounds about right, Harlan said, though his heart wasn't in it. Or until our skulls crack, whichever comes first. You say that like it's a bad thing, Rook interjected, pulling up a stool and joining the pity party. At least we'd get a break from these alien babysitters. The room fell silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts, none of which were particularly uplifting. It was hard to keep pushing when every step forward felt like 2 steps back, and those steps were on a treadmill set to screw you. Harlan finally broke the silence, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage out the frustration. We need a new angle, something to keep these Zarnak off our backs without them realizing we're just stalling. Got any bright ideas? Gertie asked, though the question was more sarcastic than hopeful. Not yet, but I'm open to suggestions, preferably ones that don't involve us getting vaporized. Rook snorted. There goes my plan to blow up the central hub and blame it on faulty wiring. That's plan B, Harlan said, half serious. Plan A is to survive without making things worse. The problem was survival wasn't much of a strategy. The Zarnak had resources, patience, and a disdain for human creativity that bordered on pathological. Every rule they imposed was another chain around Portalis, and the links were tightening. For now, the only thing they could do was ride the wave and hope it didn't drown them. The next few days were a blur of controlled chaos. Between dodging Zarnak patrols and navigating the increasingly restrictive measures, Portalis felt more like a prison than ever. Supplies were dwindling, rationing was in place, and morale was sinking faster than a lead balloon in a vacuum. Harlan found himself pacing the corridors, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of helplessness that clung to him like a stubborn itch. Each door he passed was a reminder of the people relying on him to find a way out of this mess, and each closed door felt like a reminder of another failure. He stopped by the mess hall, now a shadow of its former self. Where there had once been laughter and conversation, there was only the muted clatter of cutlery and the occasional sigh of resignation. Gertie sat at a table, fiddling with a bowl of something that might have been food in a past life. Hey Harlan, she said, not bothering to look up. Care to join the feast? Don't mind if I do, he replied, sliding into a seat across from her. What's on the menu today? Whatever didn't crawl away first, she answered, pushing the bowl in his direction. Bon appetit. Harlan poked at the contents with a fork, his expression a mix between curiosity and horror. You know, I've had worse, not recently, but still. Compliments to the chef, Gertie said dryly. Across the room, Rook was trying to convince a group of engineers that fixing the teleportation hub would somehow solve all their problems. Given the hub's track record, it was about as likely as its sprouting legs and running off to join the circus. We've hit a wall, Gertie said, her voice barely above a whisper. People are tired, Harlan, and I don't just mean sleep-deprived, I mean soul-crushingly exhausted. Harlan nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a leaden cloak. I know, but we can't stop. If we give up now, we might as well paint ourselves a nice target and wait for the Zarnak to finish us off. So what do we do? She asked, and the vulnerability in her voice was a rare crack in her usually unflappable demeanor. We do what we always do, Harlan replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We improvise, adapt, and hope like hell something sticks. Gertie sighed, her fork clattering against the bowl as she leaned back in her chair. Let's hope this time, luck's on our side. Luck, it seemed, was a fickle mistress. The following morning, Harlan was awoken by the shrill blare of alarms, the kind that suggested imminent disaster rather than a friendly wake-up call. What now? He groaned, rolling out of bed with all the grace of a drunken octopus. He stumbled into the corridor, joining the throng of bleary-eyed residents heading towards the control room. Rook and Gertie were already there, their expressions a mix of annoyance and concern. "What's the emergency?" Harlan asked, fighting to be heard over the cacophony. "Zarnak's up the ante," Rook replied, gesturing to the screens that were lighting up with alerts. "Looks like they're tightening the screws even more." Gertie pointed to a message scrolling across the main display. "They're imposing a curfew, effective immediately." "Wonderful," Harlan muttered, "because what we really needed was more restrictions. Guess they're not fans of our cultural night out," Rook said with a sardonic grin. Harlan rubbed his temples, the headache from earlier returning with reinforcements. "All right, let's think this through. How do we work around a curfew?" "Very carefully," Gertie replied, her tone as dry as the desert. It was a predicament with no easy answers. Zarnak were closing in, and the already tenuous supply lines were now at risk of being severed altogether. The once bustling corridors of Portalis had become ghostly trenches, lined with the tired faces of people who'd been pushed to their limits and beyond. "Maybe it's time we rethink our strategy," Rook suggested. "Play along for now, keep our heads down while we regroup." Harlan shook his head. "We've been playing their game for too long. We need to take control of the narrative. And how do you propose we do that?" Gertie asked, though the question was more rhetorical than anything else. "By doing what humans do best," Harlan replied, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to rewrite the rules." "Sounds ambitious," Rook said, though there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Ambitious is all we've got left," Harlan replied. "It's time we reminded the Zarnak who they're dealing with." With the odds stacked against them and the walls closing in, it was a gamble of stupendous proportions. But as Harlan took another look around the control room, the heart of their operation, he realized that he'd take those odds any day over the alternative. "Let's get to work," he said, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a spark in his eyes. A spark that promised the Zarnak, and anyone else who dared underestimate them, that the fight was far from over. As they huddled around the console once more, the weight of the moment pressed down on them. But where others might have buckled, Harlan and his crew found strength. In the darkest hours, they were ready to do what needed to be done, no matter the cost. Because when it came to survival, there was no limit to what they could achieve, no challenge too great to overcome. Not when the stakes were this high, not when the fate of Portalis hung in the balance, and certainly not when they had nothing left to lose. So onwards they marched into the uncertain future, with grit in their hearts and defiance in their souls. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was making the impossible possible. The control room of Portalis buzzed with a frenetic energy that had nothing to do with motivation and everything to do with desperation. Harlan Twist stood at the console, brow furrowed like a man trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with his eyes closed. The screens were a kaleidoscope of chaos, alerts blipping with all the enthusiasm of a toddler slamming piano keys. "All right, let's run through this one more time," Harlan said, trying to keep his voice calm, though it came out more like a growl. "We've got our backs to the wall, and the Zarnak are breathing down our necks like overzealous librarians." "Suggestions." Gertie, looking like a human embodiment of caffeine withdrawal, drummed her fingers on the desk. "We could always just tell them we've forgotten how to read, worked in school." Rook piped up, eyes twinkling with a mischief that would have put Puck to shame. "Or we could send them a holiday card. Dear Zarnak, wish you were here." "Not enforcing curfews." "The sarcasm's appreciated," Harlan muttered, shaking his head, "but we're going to need more than smartassery to get out of this one." The problem was, the Zarnak had gotten entirely too comfortable with the human knack for bending, if not outright breaking the rules. As far as they were concerned, Portalis was a petulant child that needed a firm hand, and they were all too happy to provide one. "Maybe it's time we played their game," Gertie suggested, a glint of something like hope cutting through her fatigue, "but with our rules." "Intriguing," Harlan mused, leaning against the console. "So how do we turn a bunch of interstellar bureaucrats into the universe's most confused cats?" "Zinnia," Rook said suddenly, a spark of inspiration lighting up his face. "He's got a PhD in making systems do things they're not supposed to. If anyone can out-bureaucrat the Zarnak, it's her." Harlan's lips curled into a grin that was part relief, part wickedness. "Get her on the line. We've got some paperwork to shuffle." Zinnia was the sort of tech genius who could hack a toaster to make coffee. She was an enigma wrapped in a lab coat, with a mind as sharp as a knife and a disposition as prickly as a cactus. When she appeared on the screen, her eyes were already scanning the data, mouth chewing on the remnants of a sandwich that looked older than Harlan's patience. "Ah, Harlan," she said, swallowing with a grimace, "to what do I owe the pleasure of this interruption?" "Let me guess, something's on fire." "Not yet," Harlan replied, "but we're working on it." "Fantastic," she said dryly. "What do you need?" Harlan leaned in, steepling his fingers like an old-school villain. "We need someone who can outmaneuver the Zarnak's protocols, someone who speaks fluent red tape." Zinnia raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Flattery will get you nowhere, but I do like a challenge. What exactly are you hoping to achieve?" "We need to weaponize bureaucracy," Gertie said, jumping in. "Use Earth's own tangled web of rules to tie the Zarnak in knots." Zinnia's eyes sparkled with the kind of devilish glee that only comes from the promise of absolute chaos. "Oh, I can do that. But I hope you realize this will require a level of coordination usually reserved for orchestras and synchronized swimmers. That's why we called you," Rook said, injecting a bit of optimism into the proceedings. "If we can pull this off, we might just buy ourselves enough breathing room to come up with a real plan." "All right," Zinnia said, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Let's see what kind of hell we can raise." The plan was deceptively simple, like a house of cards waiting for a gentle breeze. With Zinnia's expertise, they could reroute communications to create a series of contradictory orders that would leave the Zarnak tangled in their own procedural underwear. But timing was everything, and one misstep could land them in a world of hurt. Harlan gathered his motley crew in the control room, the tension thicker than a politician's promise. "All right, folks, this is our Hail Mary. We've got to coordinate like never before, no room for error." Gertie nodded, eyes fixed on the console. "Think of it as synchronized swimming in a pool of piranhas." "Comforting," Rook said, rolling his eyes. "I always wanted to be a snack." "Focus," Harlan snapped, though his tone carried a hint of amusement. "Zinnia's sending us the instructions. We follow them to the letter, and maybe, just maybe, we can pull this off." "Got it," Gertie said, her fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced ease. "We're ready when you are." Zinnia's voice crackled over the comms, clear and confident. "Initiating sequence in 3, 2, 1. The room held its collective breath as the operation began. On-screen, data flowed like a digital river, cascading through channels and rerouting signals faster than the eye could follow. It was a ballet of controlled chaos, and even Harlan had to admit it was a thing of beauty. Rook watched in awe, shaking his head. "You know, if this doesn't work, we're all going to look like idiots." Harlan smirked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Rook, we already look like idiots. This is just about making sure we don't feel like ones too." As the minutes ticked by, the team worked in silent harmony, each keystroke a step closer to freedom or utter disaster. There was no room for mistakes, only the hope that Zinnia's plan could outfox the Zarnak at their own game. "Everything's still in the green," Gertie reported, her voice tight with concentration. "But we've got to keep the pressure on. If they figure out what we're doing before we're finished, then we're toast." Harlan finished for her. "Keep it tight, people." Hours flew by in a blur of tension and determination, every second a potential turning point. The Zarnak, as expected, began to respond, their own systems scrambling to untangle the web Zinnia had woven. Messages collided in a perfect storm of confusion, orders clashing with counterorders, until the whole system threatened to implode. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zinnia's voice came through again, triumphant. "It's done. The Zarnak are going to be chasing their tails for weeks." A collective sigh of relief washed over the room. Harlan leaned back, feeling the residual tension drain away, replaced by a weary satisfaction. "We've bought ourselves some time, now let's use it wisely." Rook clapped a hand on Harlan's shoulder, grinning like a madman. "I can't believe we actually pulled it off." "Not over yet," Gertie cautioned, though her own relief was palpable. "We still need to figure out our next move." But for now, there was a sense of victory, however small. They'd managed to turn the tables, if only temporarily, and that was a win in Harlan's book. "We've got a break," he said, standing and stretching his arms. "Let's make sure we use it to get ahead." "Zinnia, you've done us proud." Zinnia's face appeared on the screen, her expression one of smug satisfaction. "Well, I do aim to please. Just remember, next time you need a miracle, my rates are going up." Harlan chuckled, for once feeling like they might just have a chance. "Noted. Now let's see if we can make this break count." The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose, with the weight of the Zarnak's oppressive gaze lifted. If only temporarily, the people of Portalis came alive, with a determination that hadn't been seen in months. Conversations buzzed with ideas and plans, the corridors filled with the kind of energy that only comes from having nothing left to lose. Harlan worked tirelessly, coordinating with resistance cells and pushing back against the Zarnak in whatever small ways they could. Supply lines were re-established, new tactics discussed, and morale, for the first time in what felt like forever, began to creep upward. And as the days turned into weeks, the spark of rebellion grew into a flame, flickering defiantly in the face of overwhelming odds. It wasn't a perfect solution, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed. Harlan stood at the helm of it all, acutely aware of the stakes but ready to face whatever came next. They might not have had a guarantee of success, but they had something just as powerful. Hope, stubborn and unyielding, propelling them forward into the unknown. Because if there was one thing Harlan Twist knew, it was that humans were annoyingly persistent creatures. And as long as there was a fight to be had, they wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The control room of Portalis was a symphony of chaos, or at least that's how Harlan liked to describe it to people who hadn't had the joy of experiencing it firsthand. The team was entrenched, each at their station, eyes glued to screens that flashed with the frenetic energy of a galaxy at war with itself. There's something poetic about watching the Zarnak bureaucracy eat its own tail, Gertie remarked, her eyes darting across her console as if she were tracking the world's most boring comet. Poetic. Sure, if you're the kind of person who writes odes to migraines. Rook shot back, his fingers flying over his keyboard with the dexterity of a caffeine-fueled octopus. Don't knock migraines until you've had one, Harlan interjected, leaning back in his chair with a kind of casual authority that suggested he might fall asleep at any moment. They make great excuses for ignoring calls. Guys, focus. Zinnia's voice crackled across the comms, sharp as a laser scalpel. You wanted chaos, you've got it, but this is like juggling live grenades. Nice to watch as long as you're at a safe distance. We're juggling from inside the blast zone, Rook pointed out, his eyes fixed on the intricate dance of data before him. Exactly, Zinnia replied with a wry chuckle. Just don't drop anything. The plan, if one could call it that without bursting into hysterical laughter, revolved around a simple premise: overwhelm the Zarnak with their own red tape. It was the sort of logic that defied reason, which Harlan reflected might just be why it was working. All right, let's review, Harlan began, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through well-aged cheese. We've got the Zarnak sending orders that contradict each other. The communications hub is a mess, and their own regulations are turning on them like a rabid dog on a sugar high. Sounds about right, Gertie nodded, her face lit by the glow of a dozen screens. It's like watching a majestic starship try to dock with its landing gear up. Beautifully catastrophic. And if we're lucky, Harlan continued, it'll buy us enough time to turn this whole thing around. Or at least not die in a blaze of bureaucratic glory, Rook added, his trademark grin plastered across his face. The truth was, nobody really knew how the Zarnak were going to react. They were an enigmatic bunch, with all the charm of a malfunctioning toaster oven and twice the unpredictability. But one thing was clear, they didn't like looking foolish, and right now they were wearing the cosmic equivalent of a dunce hat. We're getting reports of Zarnak ships retreating from Portalis, Zinnia announced, her voice tinged with the kind of glee usually reserved for kids on snow days. Looks like the chaos is spreading faster than a rumor at a high school reunion. It's a start, Harlan said, watching the data stream with a mix of hope and disbelief. But let's not count our chickens before they hatch, or whatever it is Zarnak lay eggs in. Pods, Gertie corrected, and they're disgusting, like if a bean-bag chair and a jellyfish had a baby. Lovely, Harlan grimaced. Stay focused, people. This is just the opening act. Asterisk, the Zarnak had always prided themselves on their efficiency, which seemed about as justified as bragging about being the fastest sloth. Their procedures, once thought impenetrable, were now unraveling like a sweater at the mercy of a hyperactive kitten. We've hit the mother lode, Rook declared, a new burst of data lighting up his screen. Looks like they're redirecting resources to deal with this mess. Their whole system's on the fritz, which means they've got less manpower to breathe down our necks, Gertie added, tapping her screen with satisfaction. For now, anyway. Let's not get complacent, Harlan cautioned, though he couldn't help but smile at the prospect of a little breathing room. The Zarnak might be flailing, but they're still dangerous, like a cornered animal with a PhD in passive-aggressive warfare. Zinnia's voice broke through the chatter, cool and commanding. I'm feeding false data into their communication channels, should keep them busy trying to figure out which foot to shoot themselves in next. Harlan couldn't have been prouder. Keep it up, Zinnia. If we can keep their heads spinning, we might just pull this off. The room buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose, the kind of energy that only comes when you've got nothing left to lose and everything left to win. The stakes were high, but so was the team's resolve. Gertie leaned over, her voice low and conspiratorial. Think we'll actually get out of this one alive? Depends, Harlan said with a shrug. On whether the universe's got a sense of humor or just a sick sense of irony. I'd bet on irony, Rook chimed in. But hey, at least we'll go out swinging. Or face-planting, Gertie added with a smirk. Either way, it'll be one hell of a show. Asterisk, as the hours slipped by, the Zarnak's grip on Portalis began to loosen. Wasn't a full retreat, not yet, but it was close enough to give the people of Portalis a fighting chance. We're seeing more ships pulling back, Zinnia reported, her voice crackling with a mix of excitement and exhaustion. Looks like our smoke and mirrors routine is doing the trick. Let's just hope they don't figure out they're chasing their own tails before we get a solid foothold, Harlan replied, his eyes scanning the screen as if searching for some cosmic reassurance. Don't worry, Gertie said, her gaze steady. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll be so far ahead they'll need a map and a miracle to catch up. Optimism, now that's a rare commodity, Rook remarked, his tone half-joking, half-serious. I've always been a sucker for lost causes, Gertie shot back, flashing a grin that was all teeth and bravado. The team worked tirelessly, coordinating their efforts like a ragtag orchestra, each member playing their part in the symphony of survival. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was working. Against all odds, the Zarnak's stranglehold on Portalis was beginning to fracture. Okay, folks, Harlan called out, drawing everyone's attention. We've got momentum on our side. Let's not waste it. We've got to push, and we've got to push hard. The team's response was a chorus of determination, a collective agreement that no matter how bleak the odds, they wouldn't go down without a fight. Zinnia's voice cut through the rising clamor, a beacon of calm amidst the storm. I've got one last trick up my sleeve. It's a long shot, but if it works, it'll send the Zarnak packing with their tails between their legs. Long shots are our specialty, Rook said, grinning like a man who's just been handed the keys to the universe's biggest stockpile of booze. Then let's make this one count, Harlan replied, his voice carrying a weight of hope and desperation. The plan was as audacious as it was reckless. Zinnia had rigged the central teleportation hub to overload, not enough to cause any real damage, but just enough to give the impression of imminent disaster. If the Zarnak thought Portalis was on the verge of self-destruction, they might just decide it wasn't worth the trouble. It's a bluff, Zinnia admitted, her voice laced with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've already won the hand before the cards are on the table. But it's a damn good one. Bluffing a race of pragmatic overlords, Gertie mused. It's almost poetic. Or suicidal, Rook countered, though there was admiration in his voice. Same difference, Harlan quipped, his eyes never leaving the cascade of data flowing across the screens. As Zinnia commenced her final maneuver, the team held their breath, anticipation mingling with dread. The teleportation hub's readings spiked, alarms blaring as the system threatened to implode under its own weight. Here we go, Zinnia announced, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. The Zarnak, faced with the apparent collapse of the very infrastructure they sought to control, began a hasty retreat. Their ships, sleek and menacing, peeled away from Portalis like birds fleeing a storm. They're falling for it, Rook said, disbelief mingling with awe. It's working, Gertie whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of triumph and disbelief. As the last of the Zarnak ships disappeared into the void, a cheer erupted from the team. A collective release of breath held for far too long. Against all odds, they'd managed to turn the tide, to push back against an enemy that had seemed insurmountable. Harlan allowed himself a small smile, a flicker of hope sparking in the darkness. It was a victory, however small, in a universe that rarely afforded such luxuries. All right, folks, he called out, his voice ringing with a newfound strength. We've got breathing room, but let's not get complacent. There's still work to be done. But for now, there was a sense of accomplishment, of having faced down the odds and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And sometimes a start was all you needed. As the team dispersed, each member basking in the afterglow of improbable success, Harlan allowed himself a moment to reflect. The universe was a harsh mistress, but today they'd managed to steal a dance, and that was something worth celebrating. Let's see what tomorrow brings, Harlan murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, because whatever it was, they'd be ready. The aftermath of the Zarnak retreat left Portalis in a state that could best be described as organized chaos, which was a step up from the previous Chaos Sans organization. The central teleportation hub, that grand monument to unreliable alien technology, was finally getting the TLC it so desperately needed. A team of engineers, who looked about as trustworthy around machinery as a toddler with a blowtorch, buzzed about, trying to coax the thing back into operation. Harlan Twist stood at the center of it all, surveying the scene with a mixture of exhaustion and something almost resembling hope. Almost. He sipped the last dregs of a coffee that tasted like it had been brewed from the tears of insomniacs and tried to wrap his brain around the concept of rebuilding. Looks like we're going to have to invent a new word for clusterfuck, he mused aloud, to no one in particular. We could always go with everyday miracle, Gertie suggested as she strolled over, wearing a smirk that was as comforting as a rusty nail in your shoe, though that's more optimistic than we're used to. Harlan chuckled, a dry sound like paper crumpling. And what would we know about optimism? We're experts in the art of near misses and last-minute escapes. Optimism is for people who win lottery jackpots, not people who dodge alien invasions. Gertie nodded, her eyes scanning the chaos. True, but hey, at least we're not dead, and we get to fiddle with alien tech without the Zarnak breathing down our necks. There's a silver lining, Harlan said. Or maybe just more duct tape holding the universe together. Rook appeared beside them, his usual grin in place, though it looked a bit more frayed around the edges. Did someone mention duct tape? Because I hear it's the universe's most reliable resource, second only to human stubbornness, or our inability to follow rules, Gertie added, rolling her eyes, which, let's be honest, is the real superpower here. Speaking of stubbornness, Harlan said, how's our favorite protocol enforcer? Zardock, as if summoned by sheer will, approached with the gait of someone who had seen too much and still had a clipboard to show for it. The Zarnak have agreed to a temporary ceasefire, under the condition that we provide proof of intent to repair the hub and maintain future compliance. Ah yes, Rook said with a mock salute, because nothing says we come in peace like an ultimatum. Harlan raised an eyebrow, and here I thought the Zarnak were fond of playing the long game. Guess we rattled their cages more than we thought. Or maybe they just got tired of tripping over their own red tape, Gertie suggested. Zardock shrugged, his alien features giving nothing away. The Zarnak are nothing if not adaptable, though their adaptability does not often include grace under pressure. Sounds like someone else we know, Rook said, nudging Harlan in the ribs. Hey, my grace is like a fine wine. It gets better with age, Harlan shot back, then added, or it turns to vinegar, depends on the day. Gertie laughed, a sound as sharp and brittle as glass. Either way, it seems we've been granted a reprieve, for now. The team had managed to buy themselves some breathing space, a temporary peace that felt like standing on the edge of a precipice with just enough room to lean back. The Zarnak, pragmatic to the core, had retreated to lick their wounds and rethink their strategy. Meanwhile, Earth was left to pick up the pieces, a task that was as daunting as it was familiar. The repairs on the central teleportation hub were going about as well as could be expected, which is to say, slowly and with a lot of swearing. Human and alien engineers worked side by side, a mishmash of languages and gestures that somehow managed to convey everything they needed to know. It was like watching an interstellar version of charades, but with more sparks and the occasional small explosion. Harlan watched from a safe distance, hands stuffed in his pockets, trying to piece together what this new reality would look like. Think it'll hold? He asked Gertie, who joined him in the spectator section. Eventually, she replied, crossing her arms. The real question is, what happens if it doesn't? Harlan shrugged, a gesture that encapsulated centuries of human resilience. Then we fix it again and again until it sticks. Spoken like a true survivor, Gertie said, her tone both admiring and exasperated. More like someone who's too stubborn to quit, Harlan corrected. Survival's just a side effect. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the hub flickered and hummed its alien song. It didn't seem quite as ominous without the threat of Zarnak oversight looming like a thundercloud, but it was still a temperamental beast. Do you ever wonder why we keep doing this? Gertie asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Fighting impossible odds. Surviving by the skin of our teeth. Why not just let someone else handle it for once? Harlan considered the question, his gaze distant. Because if we don't, who will? We're in the business of making miracles happen, or at least preventing total disaster. And besides, it's not like anyone else knows how to deal with this mess better than us. Gertie laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the gloom. Point taken, though sometimes I think we're just gluttons for punishment. Could be, Harlan agreed, but we wouldn't have it any other way. By the time the hub was deemed operational, at least on a tentative trial basis, Portalis had begun to resemble a place worth living in again. The public's, once a Zarnak heritage site in name only, was now bustling with activity. Vendors hawked wares, children chased each other through the throng, and the air was filled with the sound of hopeful chaos. Rook stood beside Harlan, watching the scene unfold with a strangely nostalgic expression. You know, I never thought I'd miss this place. But seeing it come back to life, it's almost heartwarming. Careful, Harlan warned with a grin. Next thing you know, you'll be getting sentimental. Perish the thought, Rook replied with a shudder. But it's nice to know that even after all this, people are still people. Resilient little pests, aren't we? Like cockroaches, Harlan said, but with less charm. Gertie joined them, a steaming cup of what she claimed was coffee in hand. You two getting misty-eyed over the ruins of civilization. Something like that, Rook admitted. What's the word on the Zarnak? They're sticking to their ceasefire for now, Gertie replied. But who knows how long that'll last. We're still on their radar, just not as a priority target. Well, that's something, Harlan said. Maybe they'll get bored and decide to pick on someone their own size. Not likely, Gertie snorted. They love a challenge almost as much as we do. Then let's hope they stay challenged somewhere else, Rook said. I'd rather not find out what happens if they come back swinging. Harlan nodded, a solemnity settling over his features. Agreed. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to be ready for anything. The universe might not be done with us yet. Gertie raised her cup in a mock toast. To survival, then, and to making it up as we go along. Cheers, Rook said, clinking an imaginary glass. As the three of them stood there, watching Portalis slowly rebuild itself from the ashes of conflict, there was an undeniable sense of accomplishment. It wasn't a victory parade, but it was a start, a tentative step toward something resembling peace. And maybe, just maybe, it was a sign that humanity still had a few tricks up its sleeve. Zinnia's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and clear. Harlan, you might want to take a look at this. He excused himself from the square, heading back toward the control room where Zinnia had made her temporary lair among the tangled wires and glowing screens. What's up? He asked as he entered, noting the tension in her posture. Incoming transmission from the Zarnak, she replied, not taking her eyes off the data streaming across the monitors. Looks like they want to talk. Talk, as in diplomacy or taunting? Harlan asked, not entirely sure which he'd prefer. Not sure yet, Zinnia said, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. But they're using official channels, so either they've decided to take us seriously or they're prepping for round 2. Harlan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Well, here's hoping they favor words over weapons this time. Don't hold your breath, Zinnia cautioned, but it wouldn't hurt to be prepared to negotiate. Negotiate, Harlan repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. Guess there's a first time for everything. As Zinnia worked her magic, bringing the incoming transmission to life, Harlan couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The Zarnak had always been unpredictable, and this new development was no exception. But even in the face of uncertainty, there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Humans were nothing if not adaptable, and if the Zarnak were willing to talk, it meant there was a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless, that peace could be more than just a temporary illusion. Let's see what tomorrow brings, he murmured to himself, echoing his earlier thoughts, because whatever came next, he knew they would face it head-on, with snark, stubbornness, and maybe a little luck. The universe was full of surprises, after all, and so were they.